Joining me now is Ndioka White, Chief of Staff in the Office of the President, to break down this 8-point stimulus plan. Ndioka, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Let's begin with the figure, 53.7 billion shillings. You heard the expert in the previous story saying that's just a drop in the ocean. Considering when you value our economy, it's roughly 9.9 trillion shillings right now. Many asking, how will that jumpstart the economy?
Victoria, this is the second intervention by the government. In late March, when we started tightening up the COVID response measures, and we had completely seen the kind of economic impact that the economy was going through, the government put together the Tax Amendment Act 2020. In that act, the government has already foregone over 175 billion shillings in revenues. That's direct injection into the economy. VAT from 16 to 14%. Corporation tax from 30 to 25%. Top-end PAYE from 30 to 25%. Tax relief on a number of fronts. For those in the lowest earning bracket below 24,000 shillings, which was raised by Parliament actually to 50,000 shillings. So already phase one, package one, has delivered over 175 billion shillings worth of interventions to the economy. And that's hardly a drop in the ocean. Now, the 53.7 billion is a very targeted intervention that the president had indicated is looking at cushioning the economy really from the bottom up. It's very much mwananchi, bottom of the pyramid intervention if you look at the specific sectors that have been targeted. A lot of the people who have gone out of business, who are suffering at the moment, are those that have been affected by the COVID pandemic, but really are those that have been targeted by this intervention, sector by sector. And I'm happy to go through that in detail. So I'm not going to disagree with the expert, but he must be able to frame this in the entire context.
Oh, you mentioned tax relief, but several people have lost their jobs. So when you're looking at impact, very few actually benefited from those reliefs in tax.
Out of the employment base, we do have our estimates in terms of the people who are likely to lose their jobs. And this pandemic is not, has affected the whole world. Victoria, Kenya is not insulated from the realities of this disease. So we must accept that first and see what do we do about these interventions. So the tax relief may not have benefited those who lost their jobs, but in turn, they have benefited from lowered price on the retail front in terms of VAT going down from 16 to 14%, right? And we may not be able to cushion everybody in the economy, but we have to take steps to start shielding employers and the employees who are still employed, because we don't want them to join the pool of unemployed people.
And speaking of unemployment, the tourism sector has been hit extremely hard in this time. There'll be some soft loans channeled through the Tourism Finance Corporation. What are the terms for the hotel sector wanting to take advantage of this intervention? Well,
our Cabinet Secretary for Tourism has really been evangelical about the sort of interventions that need to be made in the sector. Some of our hotel facilities in the coast have taken a long hit. They're dilapidated, and we want to take this opportunity to refurbish them. This is going to be patient capital. They'll be able to access this cash over long term with low interest payments. And really the guarantor of ultimate resort here is the state. So this money would not be typically available to them in the private financial sector circles, because the viability of their businesses would be questioned by the banks, given the scenario. But we understand that even as the world will start to open up, tourism perhaps will take a while to recover, largely because around the restrictions on movement. So we have to give these hotels an opportunity to refurbish. We need to look at our conferencing facilities and direct some resources in that direction. So we are quite clear that we will use this period of while we're in the pandemic and trying to get out of it, to make sure that we give our hotels some time to recover.
And speaking of the recovery, part of that revival of the tourism sector will be relying heavily on domestic tourism, getting more Kenyans to tour and invest in local hotels. When you're thinking about foreign tourists, it will take some time before they actually make their way back into Kenya. How are you looking at boosting domestic tourism?
I think the president, even in his last address, he said it's all about Kenya. We must now wear Kenya on our sleeves when we wake up, when we go to bed. Nothing stops us now from touring destinations within our country. But this is largely dependent, I need to put this qualifier, on what steps, the de-escalation steps on the COVID-19 pandemic. So far, Kenya is doing phenomenally well in containing the spread of the pandemic and in limiting the damage and the human cost of the pandemic. But this could change if we lift these restrictions and there is little or low compliance with self-distancing measures, sanitation measures, hygiene measures, and some of the interventions that we know now work in terms of limiting the spread of the coronavirus. So once we are able to open up in a very systematic way, we will start being able to see movement of people from point A to B. So I don't expect hotels to be full. In fact, I expect them to work with limited numbers. Both entertainment, restaurants, and hotels will work within very controlled protocols that the government will issue. There is a team far smarter than me that is working on all these de-escalation protocols, and in time, as we progress, these will be announced, and we will be able to see what de-escalation steps will be taken and how these will impact key sectors in hospitality.
Let's talk SMEs, which have gotten a big chunk of this stimulus plan, including a 3 billion seed capital. How are they supposed to access that? And is there a criteria that will kind of determine and guide that process?
Yes, you know, this has been a long time coming. The big challenge for SMEs today is that the banks see them as a high risk, more so now in the current situation, where supply chains have been largely impacted, markets, traditional marketplaces have been completely disrupted. Some of the businesses which they were doing have been affected quite significantly by the restrictions that have been put in place to contain the pandemic. But we know we are going to get out of this place, and these businesses will need to access funds in order to get their businesses back on track. We expect to work with private commercial undertakings, financial institutions regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya, where the government will simply, together with other DFIs, will use this core guarantee fund to provide what we call a first loss guarantee. So if you go to your bank X and as an SME, you meet the criteria that will be set out in terms of the viability of your business, a business that feeds into an ecosystem that is sustainable. So, for example, those in the manufacturing sector, those in the agro-processing sector, those in the textile sector, those are low-hanging fruit in terms of immediate revival. But for them to access this credit, they will need to get into transactions with commercial banks. And these banks will be able to lend this money with the government backstopping part of the risk. So it's not a loan that is, or money that is being given away to people. It is a loan, pretty much like any other loan where the borrower is obligated to pay. Only this time they will have access to this money in a way that the banks will be able to give it to them, knowing full well that the government is providing some form of risk backstop to those banks, which is what really they have been looking for. And really under the leadership of the Central Bank of Kenya, you will see a lot more information coming out on this. But I can assure you that we already have interest of quite a number of DFIs to add to this 3 billion shillings. So that the 3 billion shillings is in essence only a seed fund to this core guarantee fund, Victoria.
And Nzioka, before I let you go, a big question for a lot of Kenyans tonight when it comes to big chunks of money like this is accountability. And, you know, considering that the Auditor General's office is still vacant, how do you guarantee that this money will go where it's supposed to go?
Well, the replacement for the Auditor General is well in progress. There's a short list which everybody is aware of. So that will take its natural course, and an Auditor General will be put in place in good time. This stimulus package, majority of it is in the financial year 2020-2021. It follows the normal fiscal framework, the public finance management framework. Accountability falls within that level. At the point of deployment of those funds, there is oversight at multiple levels, not just from the Auditor General, but the oversight committees in the National Assembly and in the Senate, as the case may apply. So anybody seeking to misuse these funds will face the full force of the law. It is the intention of the President that these funds are deployed as quickly as possible to the people who need it most. And in his address today, you saw that he made an extremely passionate appeal to legislators to really give the finance bill a big push and get it out on time. I'm sure when our Cabinet Secretary to the National Treasury reads the budget statement on June 11th, the public will be able to see in greater detail the larger budget that we're talking about.
And speaking of which, really quickly, you know, pending approval by Parliament, when do you expect this rollout to happen?
Well, you know, I can't speak for the National Assembly, but we do know there is significant goodwill. The National Assembly is seized of the crisis that the country is going through. They have expedited the passage of quite a number of pieces of legislation, the Supplementary Bill, the Tax Amendment Act, and the Division of Revenues, an appropriation bill that followed after that. They have been extremely supportive, and we don't think this will be any different. I think our legislators are empathetic about the situation that our people are in, and I believe that every effort will be made to make sure that the national government and our devolved governments receive these resources as soon as possible.